Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the 7th Annual Getzen Government Accountability Lecture, sponsored by the School of Public and International Affairs and our Department of Public Administration and Policy. I'm Tom Loth, Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs. Before introducing our speaker, I want to make a couple of recognitions. With us this afternoon is the Provost of the University of Georgia, Jerry Moorhead. Jerry, thank you for joining us. The Sheriff of Athens-Clarke County, Ira Edwards, is in the back of the room and will keep us safe. Sheriff Edwards, thank you so much for being here. And my colleague, E. Culpepper Clark, the Dean of the Henry W. Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications, our speaker's dean, is here. Cully, thank you so much for being here. I also want to recognize the individuals who make this event possible every year. Catherine Getzen Willoughby, an alumni of our PhD program in public administration and a professor at Georgia State University, and Dan Hall Willoughby, an alumnus of the Georgia School of Law and a partner at King & Spalding. This lecture honors Catherine's parents, Evangeline and Forrest Getzen of Raleigh, North Carolina. Catherine and Dan, I'm going to ask you to stand. I know you're uncomfortable doing that, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. If you please stand and let us thank you. And let us thank you for all that you do for the students and our faculty and for the Athens community. Cynthia Tucker is visiting professor of journalism and the Charlene Hunter Galt Distinguished Writer in Residence in the University of Georgia Henry W. Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communications. She was the editorial page editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 17 years. More recently, she was that newspaper's Washington-based political columnist. Her syndicated column is published in dozens of newspapers around the country. She also is a highly regarded and highly visible commentator on television and news programs. In 2007, Ms. Tucker won the Pulitzer Prize for her commentary. She's also received other awards, including Journalist of the Year from the National Association of Black Journalists. She's a 1976 graduate of Auburn University with majors in English and journalism. And she was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard University in 1988. Her lecture today is entitled, Corporations Are People: The Corrosive Influence of Money on Campaigns. Please join me in welcoming her as the 2012 Getzen Lecturer.
Good afternoon. To the Willoughbys, members of the administration, faculty, students, and friends, I am delighted to be here with you this afternoon. I spent years, as you heard, as an editorial page editor, diving deep into obscure issues about which the average reader knew little and cared less. That makes me a perfect fit for the Academy. I dare say that anyone who spent years ferreting out the finer points of obscure issues that ordinary people care little about has a lot in common with the professors and graduate students in this room. So thank you, University of Georgia and Dean Clark especially, for offering me a place in the classroom. And thank you, Dean Loth, for inviting me to give this lecture. I'm especially delighted to be speaking today because campaign finance reform is one of those obscure issues that I care about a great deal, but that the average citizen finds boring, overly complex, irrelevant, or all three. There is certainly something to the first two complaints. Campaign finance reform doesn't exactly get the heart racing like a good fight over raising taxes on the rich or cutting Medicare. It doesn't set the Twitterverse alight like the showdown between the Obama administration and Catholic bishops over contraceptives. And heaven knows campaign finance laws are stupefyingly complex, a full employment act for lawyers. But it is certainly not true that campaign finance is irrelevant to average voters. That's why I spent years in the trenches in a largely futile exercise, trying to get my readers to care about it. The next few years may prove a turning point, finally. The flood of money that is swamping our campaign system, allow me to restate that, the flood of secretive money that is flooding our campaign system is likely to cause such chaos that voters will probably come to understand why they should care about reforming our campaign finance laws. Unfortunately, I suspect a major corruption case will be uncovered before we begin to understand what the U.S. Supreme Court did when it opened the floodgates in the case of Citizens United versus the FEC. You may remember the dramatic moment during his 2011 State of the Union speech when President Obama criticized the ruling, which had just been issued on a 5-4 vote carried by the High Court's conservative bloc. With several Supreme Court justices in the audience, Obama was forthright. He said, and I quote, "Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law to open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign companies, to spend without limit in our elections. Well, I don't think American elections should be bankrolled by America's most powerful interests, and worse, by foreign entities. They should be decided by the American people. And that's why I'm urging Democrats and Republicans to pass a bill that helps to right this wrong." End of quote. The president's criticism dominated news coverage for the next several days, especially since news footage showed Justice Samuel Alito seemingly mouthing the words "not true" as the president spoke. When several other conservatives weighed in to criticize Obama for allegedly being overly partisan and disrespectful of high court members, reporters resorted to covering it like any other inside the Beltway controversy. There was little discussion about whether the president's criticisms had any merit. That's what I'd like to talk about today. Many legal scholars have observed that the court's conservative bloc overturned a century of precedent, ignored laws duly put in place by a legislative body, and further, mandated a sweeping change in election finance law when it might have decided the Citizens United case more narrowly. As those scholars point out, all those things argue against the conservative bloc's characterization of itself as, well, conservative. The word conservative connotes a respect for tradition, an interest in preserving the past, a deference toward precedent. The Supreme Court's conservative bloc showed none of those traits in its ruling, nor did it leave the impression it was interested in judicial restraint. But I'm no legal scholar. I'm much more interested in the effect the decision is having on this campaign season. And I'd like to note that the effects of this decision will probably be even worse than President Obama feared when he criticized it a little more than a year ago. That's because Obama himself has joined this rowdy, excessive, and indulgent money grubbing. Having sounded the alarm about the deleterious effects of allowing corporations to flood the political system with untold amounts of cash, Obama recently decided to send out signals that he will cooperate with any super donors who want to send gazillions to super PACs supporting his campaign. I'd like to say that I'm shocked by Obama's decision. But I've been a journalist far too long for that. I'm disappointed, but I'm not surprised. The temptation proved too great. There is something deeply offensive, downright un-American in fact, about the idea that speech is just another commodity that can be purchased, traded, sold, just like guns or butter, coffee or cinnamon, Cadillacs or Chevrolets. If that's true, it stands in opposition to the animating principle of American democracy, that all men and women are created equal. The rich will have far more speech rights than you and I have, just like they have far more commodities, more jewels, more cars, more houses. They will tip the scales of elections in a way that elevates their interest above yours and mine. Those are not the principles in which I believe. But I cannot blame the idea that money equals speech on the current Supreme Court or Citizens United. That spurious claim goes back to the Buckley ruling issued in 1976. However, Buckley at least upheld the idea that Congress has the right to regulate money flowing into political campaigns. Citizens United simply tossed us further down Alice's rabbit hole. Not only is money the same as speech, but corporations are people who enjoy rights to free speech that should not be regulated by government. What a notion. I can do no better than to quote from the dissent written by Justice Stevens and joined fully or in part by 3 other justices. Stevens wrote, and I quote, "In the context of election to public office, the distinction between corporate and human speakers is significant. Although they make enormous contributions to our society, corporations are not actually members of it. They cannot vote or run for office. Because they may be managed and controlled by non-residents, their interests may conflict in fundamental respects with the interests of eligible voters." Allow me to repeat that because that goes to the heart of this dissent. Corporations cannot vote or run for office. Because they may be managed or controlled by non-residents, their interests may conflict in fundamental respects with the interests of eligible voters. Later in his dissent, Justice Stevens reiterates, and I quote, "It might be added that corporations have no consciences, no beliefs, no feelings, no thoughts, no desires. Corporations help structure and facilitate the activities of human beings, to be sure, and their personhood often serves as a useful legal fiction. But they are not themselves members of we, the people, by whom and for whom the Constitution was established." Needless to say, I agree fully with Justice Stevens. So what have the effects of the Supreme Court's ruling been so far in this campaign season? The tsunami of dollars is shaping a bitterly negative campaign that may turn out to be the bloodiest presidential campaign in modern political history. The mega-rich are using their money to fund ads that smear, defame, and trash candidates whom they oppose. Now, we know what corporations sound like when they speak. If you are as immersed in presidential politics as I am, you know that Mitt Romney's supporters succeeded in eviscerating Newt Gingrich with a series of slashing, vicious ads in Iowa and Florida. Now, I wouldn't be the first person to point out that Newt Gingrich presented a big, fat, juicy, overripe target. The strategist who made those ads didn't have to spend a lot of money on opposition research. Gingrich has more baggage than Delta Airlines, and he hasn't managed to lose any of it. That said, this campaign season has seen more negative advertising than any other in modern history, quantifiably so. An ad tracking firm called Kantar Media has studied the Republican presidential nominating campaign so far and has issued the results. 4 years ago, just 6% of campaign advertising in the GOP primary amounted to attacks on other Republicans. It was during the entire GOP primary. This season, so far, that figure has shot up to over 50%, Kantar Media said. Now, not all of that advertising has been purchased by super PACs and other entities funded by the super rich. But much of that vitriolic advertising has been made possible by, directed, produced, and paid for by Citizens United. Indeed, the Citizens United case and the super PACs it has spawned are far and away the stars of this election season. Super PACs have brought us unforgettable characters such as Foster Freeze, the Santorum backer who made the memorable comment about Bayer aspirin as a contraceptive. You didn't hear the quote. Allow me to repeat it for your edification. Ask about Santorum's rather odd views on contraceptives. Freeze said, "You know, back in my days, they used Bayer aspirin for contraception. The gals put it between their knees, and it wasn't that costly." The remark left the interviewer, MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell, speechless. We've also been introduced to Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire casino owner who single-handedly revived Newt Gingrich's campaign. And super PACs have given some headlines to Bill Maher, who recently wrote a $1 million check to a super PAC supporting the re-election of President Obama. But I'd be guilty of gross oversimplification if I suggested that Citizens United is the only culprit in a dysfunctional and possibly corrupt system of campaign financing. There is a more complicated and much uglier truth about money and its current influence on political campaigns. That truth is this: the laws governing campaign expenditures have been breaking down for the last several years. Let's take a look back to see the path we've traveled to arrive at the hot mess we're in today. If you're old enough to remember Watergate, you know that modern campaign finance laws had their birth in the Watergate scandal. If you're not old enough to remember, just know that Watergate shaped politics and journalism for a generation, which happened to be my generation. Over the intervening years, I've noticed two things. One is this: most Republicans seem to have a knee-jerk antipathy to laws that restrict or govern the financing of campaigns. You saw that in a lingering distrust of John McCain by conservative icons such as George Will in the 2008 campaign season. McCain had sponsored campaign finance reform legislation in 2002. I've never understood quite why conservatives don't like campaign finance laws, but I've long assumed that Republicans believe they will always have more money on their side. The other thing I've noticed over the years is a truism about human nature. Money will find its way into campaigns, whether legally or illegally. Those with enough money try to influence the course of who have enough money to try to influence the course of a campaign will certainly try to do so, no matter what structures are in place to try to prevent that. That's why I argue it is much better for Congress to have laws in place that govern campaign financing. But I suppose it is no great surprise that as Watergate recedes from our collective memory, campaign finance irregularities take on less importance, and politicians and their rich donors start to push the envelope. We see that the Federal Election Commission is now effectively neutered by a partisan rift. It has 6 members, and the 3 Republicans on the commission simply refuse to prosecute any infraction of the laws. So those laws have been broken with impunity. Another problem is that some campaign finance laws are regulated through the tax code, and the IRS is much too overburdened to wade through the controversies associated with campaign spending. It has enough controversies associated with April 15th. Let me give you a couple of examples which came from some excellent reporting recently done by Bloomberg News. Bloomberg found that money given by outside groups, not just super PACs, but also unions, regular PACs, and other groups outside political parties, quadrupled between 2006 and 2010. That's not the worst of it. A lot of that money has been given in secret. We have no idea where it came from. The tax code allows so-called social welfare groups to organize as nonprofits with the ostensible mission of educating Americans on crucial issues. Would it surprise you to know that Crossroads GPS, the group organized by Karl Rove with the express purpose of supporting Republicans for office, has gotten by with calling itself a nonprofit social welfare group? And because Crossroads GPS says it's a social welfare group that has nothing whatsoever to do with politics, because of course Karl Rove wouldn't get close to politics, Crossroads doesn't have to reveal its donors. It can collect gazillions to support candidates for the presidency, Congress, and state legislatures, and we may never know who the money came from. And make no mistake about it, the damage done by secret money will likely be greater in local elections than in major federal campaigns. Reporters at big newspapers will do everything they can to ferret out the gazillionaires who are giving money to Romney, Santorum, Gingrich, and Obama. But regional and smaller newspapers are now beleaguered by cutbacks. They don't have the staff to hunt for secret donors giving to legislative races and other local races. That was what was so chilling about a tale told in the New Yorker last October. Called State for Sale, it was a well-reported piece that outlined the shadowy political machinations of a multi-millionaire named Art Pope, who is North Carolina's version of the Koch brothers. He had spent millions of dollars on ads to bash Democrats in the state legislature. His goal? To secure a GOP-dominated state legislature in time for congressional redistricting. And Pope succeeded, funneling millions of dollars through tax-exempt outfits with innocuous-sounding names that are supposed to promote social welfare. Democrats who were on the receiving end of Pope's social welfare complained that they were the victims of vicious ads that smeared their reputations, distorted their records, and resorted to outright lies. Of course, we've seen negative political advertising before. So what's the difference between this campaign season and from a past in which we remember Willie Horton and King Roy the Rat and my personal favorite, or unfavorite, an ad that equated Max Cleland, a Vietnam vet and triple amputee, with Saddam Hussein? Well, there is an important distinction. The candidates associated with those ads had to appear in them and say, "My name is so-and-so, and I support this ad." When super PACs run ads supporting a candidate, candidates don't have to appear and take credit for those ads. The law says that a candidate's campaign is not supposed to coordinate with these outside groups, but that's a not-so-polite fiction that covers a number of sins. There are close ties between some outside groups and the campaigns they're promoting. They often share office space, polling, and fundraising staff. Staff who once worked for a candidate is suddenly now working for a super PAC that just happens to support that candidate. And if that isn't enough, the campaigns can coordinate with their funders through the news media. The candidate's staff gives a story saying, well, what we believe President Obama needs to focus on next is so-and-so, and the super PACs then go out and run ads toward that goal. So it's no mystery why the campaign and the outside groups promoting them are so often in sync. However, when a vile ad funded by a super PAC is broadcast, neither Mitt Romney, nor Rick Santorum, nor Newt Gingrich, nor Barack Obama has to appear at the end and take credit for it. That makes a huge difference. Forcing candidates to take credit for negative ads kept them at least at the entryway to the sewer. Allowing their supporters to make ads on their behalf lets campaigns wallow in the sewer while candidates escape the stench. So far, most of the mega-rich donors who have given extravagantly to support their candidates have been owners or CEOs of privately held companies. Adelson, Gingrich's backer, owns casinos. Pope owns a group of variety stores, including the Roses discount chain. Publicly traded companies have been a little more worried about being associated with political controversy. You may remember that Target was embroiled in a political controversy in the summer of 2010 after it made a donation to a candidate who denounced gay marriage. The company was slammed with protests by advocates for gay rights, which forced the corporation to change its policy on political contributions. However, cynic that I am, I think that reticence will change once CEOs and corporations find a way to funnel their corporations through shell holdings and nonprofits. I think the temptation will be too great to resist. As I noted earlier, this is shaping up to be a miserable campaign season of negative ads. And political scientists, perhaps some in this room, have written reams of studies documenting the depressing effect that negative advertising has on voters, who find them such a turnoff that they become more and more discouraged about democratic processes. And if establishment Republicans had originally believed that the Citizens United decision would redound to their advantage, they don't now. Without super PACs to aid his rivals, Mitt Romney would likely have already locked up the nomination. Instead, he's slugging his way through a bruising primary season that probably won't end until June. That cannot be what the establishment GOP had in mind. Indeed, I'm not sure why anyone, liberal, conservative, or moderate, would believe his or her interests are well served by the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United. That ruling has simply put on steroids some of the worst trends in secretive financing and vicious political advertising. Moreover, there is nothing to suggest that the rich donors have the interest of Main Street at heart. In North Carolina, for example, Art Pope now has the state's vaunted system of higher education in his target sites. It seems that, like Rick Santorum, Mr. Pope believes that only snobs want to send their children to college. So he believes that higher ed budgets should be slashed. That is not something that serves the interest of average folks in North Carolina. I wish I had a cheery solution to offer to this problem, or at the very least the kind of wonky but well thought out proposals that my editorial writers used to write. But I fear that we are in for several more campaign seasons of vicious ads funded by shadowy outside groups, and in which candidates themselves may lose control of their campaigns. The problem, after all, is that citizens just don't care very much about this issue yet. Inevitably, I think it will take a major scandal to change that. Now, it could be that my pessimism is misplaced. Scott Brown, Republican senator from Massachusetts, and his Democratic rival, Elizabeth Warren, have signed a pact to shun super PACs, declaring that they don't want those outside contributions running ads on their behalf. Outside contributors, rather. They have agreed to donate half the value of any ad run on their behalf by third-party groups to a charity of the opposing candidate's choice. Warren has acknowledged that she doesn't know if the effort will succeed. But she said, I know that we go into this in good faith to try to have a chance to make our best case to the voters of Massachusetts. I think that's worth trying. I wish Brown and Warren success. However, my pessimism regarding politics has rarely been misplaced. And even if Brown and Warren succeed, I don't expect many other candidates to rush to emulate their pledge. The stakes are too high. If a candidate believes he has a better chance of winning by accepting the support of an outside group, he will do so. I refer you back to President Obama. And if there are any disaffected voters out there who are really turned off by this, who are they going to support? All of the major candidates at this point are accepting funds from outside contributors. So what will happen next? I believe that we're in for a long, dark night of our democratic soul. A time of excessive spending on political campaigns, on dominance by outside groups, and eventually a scandal. It may even involve a foreign country making contributions to a major political campaign. Yes, as many defenders of Citizens United have rushed to say, that's still illegal. But because so much of the money is given secretly, how would we know? It will be difficult to find that out until a campaign is over. When that scandal occurs, American voters will be reminded how important restrictions are on campaign financing. The backlash will provoke an uprising among the citizenry that even the current Supreme Court couldn't ignore. After all, cloistered though they may be, the Mighty Nine are conscious of political change and susceptible to political movements. As Harvard Law professor Noah Feldman put it about Justice Kennedy, who wrote the Citizens United ruling for the majority, does he like the fact that the world is walking around saying he created super PACs? No. Kennedy is a politically aware person. Besides, Kennedy left himself an out. He naively wrote that, and I quote, "We now conclude that independent expenditures, including those made by corporations, do not give rise to corruption, or even the appearance of corruption." I think he's quite wrong about that, and we'll see soon enough. Until then, we can only buckle up for the ride. You've already seen the ads that a super PAC backing Mitt Romney has run about Newt Gingrich, no doubt, about the fact that he claims to love Reagan, but he doesn't love Reagan sufficiently. I hope you're not terribly turned off, because there's a lot more of that to come. Thank you. subject, or anything else that I'm sure I have an opinion about it, even if I don't really know much about the subject. Yes, sir. I think they'd like for you to walk to a microphone.
Thank you. The Citizens United decision seems to have spawned a nascent beginning organization to move forward with a possible constitutional amendment to close this off, restore every deciding in this fashion in the future. Okay? Do you think a constitutional, that's a long, hard, very difficult road. Do you think that that has any possibility, or will there be another
Not yet.
case that will go on up?
I don't think that there is enough grassroots political energy yet. Americans just don't see it yet as an important enough issue. Having said that, the constitutional amendment is such a long, hard road, I'm not even sure that's necessary. I really do think that it is possible to see the Supreme Court perhaps not quite reverse itself, but a few years down the road write another decision that is quite different from this one. But unfortunately, I do think that it will take some scandal that gets all of our attention before we see that.
I have a question concerning the obscurity of this issue. You've mentioned it several times, and I just kind of disagree with that point. Colbert and Jon Stewart, with huge viewerships, have been satirically hammering this point home for months now, and I would argue that OLS is one of the main points of contention in this.
Thank heaven for Colbert.
I know, right?
I do hope that his campaign against his satirical campaign against super PACs. For those of you who might not be in the demographic that watches The Daily Show and The Colbert Show, Stephen Colbert, the comedian, actually legally started his own super PAC, sort of to show how ridiculous the idea is. And he and Stewart do hammer at it day in and day out. I would argue that one of the problems, though, is that demographic that watches the shows isn't the demographic votes most often.
That demographic is made up of the protesters at Occupy Wall Street. There's been an Occupy Atlanta, an Occupy Athens
But
here.
voting,
So, yeah, what I was asking is,
if we
I
can
feel
just
like
get them to go, on election day and vote, about the issues that concern them, then I think you'd see more of a connect between their interest in this and something actually being done in the political arena. But I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you have another?
That's fine. I was saying maybe the disconnect. Well, when you vote, you're not allowed to vote for policy. You can only vote for people who claim they view one way or the other. So Occupy Wall Street is a manifestation of this frustration, especially youth people like myself, who are just forming their own non-hierarchical associations and just saying, kind of to hell with it, This whole fighting the political system on their terms hasn't seemed to have been causing very much change. So do you think there's any efficacy, any utility in the Occupy response to this sort of thing?
I hate to sound like such a dinosaur. And I understand the frustration. I mean, your generation gave their votes heavily to President Obama, and while he initially said he would not sign up with this, he has gone out and done it. Having said that, if you don't affect the system directly, you're not going to get very much change. Now, I would argue that Occupy Wall Street has already helped change the conversation. That's been useful. The movement to rectify growing income inequality has a lot more traction than it did before Occupy Wall Street. This business of "we are the 99% is a wonderful phrase, which a lot of politicians, you might have noticed, are trying to latch onto. I think that has helped the political conversation. But I also think that in realistic terms, you're not going to really change anything. You can do those Occupy protests and vote, is what I would argue for.
Just one more quick question. What do you think of Ron Paul? You mentioned the major political candidates. He's second in delegates currently. What do you think about him?
I am fascinated by young people's fascination with him. Really, and I give you more credit than just saying that you all want drugs legalized. I don't think it is as simple as that. I think that he has also tapped into young adults' sense of frustration over unending military campaigns. I think that that has a lot more to do with Ron Paul's success with young people. But the simple fact of the matter is, Ron Paul is basically a libertarian, and when it comes down to it, libertarians don't believe in very much government at all. And that doesn't work for me. Now, when people are young and healthy, they may think they don't need government. When you get a little older and a little less healthy, your views may change about that.
Within the past couple of years, we've seen an unprecedented number of public corporations alter their bylaws in order to limit or constrain their ability to donate to political campaigns, an encouraging sign perhaps. I expect within the 2012 proxy season, we will see an unprecedented number of proxy proposals, shareholder proposals, that will restrict or prohibit corporations, public corporations, from making donations to political campaigns. Do you have any optimism that we might see some initiative on the part of trade unions or trade associations to take responsibility for placing any restrictions upon themselves?
I realize all of my answers on this subject have been very pessimistic ones. But I've been watching the process. It'll be interesting to see if that works in Massachusetts, for example. If unions there believe that, the last polls I saw said that Elizabeth Warren was down by 10 percentage points. Still have a long ways to go. She was polling better earlier, and her numbers could change. But let's say she comes closer, within about 5 percentage points. And unions, which I would assume are back in her campaign in Massachusetts, decide that her chances for election will be better if they throw some support to her. It will be interesting to see how that works out. It really will be. I just think the temptation will be very great for them, despite what she has said about not wanting that kind of support. As for publicly traded companies, I think that they have treaded carefully for very good reason. It can be, if you're Coke or Target or any other big company, you really it is dangerous to wade into those political controversies. Again, it happened with Target on a fairly small scale, but the backlash they got was pretty big. $150,000 was all they gave. And the backlash that they got was a pretty big one. So I think that publicly traded corporations are not going to do it in this cycle. But I think if, as time goes on, they will be tempted to do so. First, through some sort of social welfare nonprofit group, that where their donations are not easily traceable. Again, I'm a pessimist about this sort of thing. Can he do that? That's my chairman. Can he ask?
Is it okay if I ask?
Go right ahead.
I wondered if the problem of these large expenditures may be even more significant on the local level, where $10,000, $20,000 would mean a whole lot, like the judgeship, local election. And just to add to that, is it really all that damaging to the Republic if Mr. Higgins comes up with $10 million to keep Newt Gingrich in the race in Florida for another couple of months? Extend it and we get more debate out of it. And the Democrats certainly aren't hurt.
Well, let me answer the second question first. I don't think establishment Republicans are enjoying these debates very much. From what I've read, some of the comments that they've made, they see the person that they believed would be their nominee, and they're still likely, I think, to be their nominee, Mitt Romney, getting increasingly